Yeah, it's a pleasure meeting all of you. And we've got kind of a snapshot of how we can improve manufacturing and distribution businesses using Business Central with their sales and use tax compliance requirements. So that's what we're going to dive into right now. Give you kind of the bottom line up front as I share my screen. As businesses continue to grow, complexity is not going away. It's only going to get more complicated. So process improvement is really the name of the game in this space because the actual requirements for sales and use tax for manufacturers and distributors are very focused, predominantly on exemption certificate management. What that means for the lay people not familiar with sales and use tax for their day to day is the onus for proving why you're not collecting sales tax on a particular transaction is that document management piece. Um, Most businesses tend to have a reactive approach, meaning, hey, we got notified, we have an audit next quarter. Do we have everything we need versus a good, efficient process in place to always be in compliance? That's not only for the regulatory risk, but also your day-to-day functions. Think those dreaded credit and rebill scenarios. So, as businesses continue to grow, whether that's into new jurisdictions, states, countries, launching new sales channels like we saw in COVID, a lot of traditional B2B sellers, wholesalers, distributors, you know, um, to stay relevant and stay in business, launched a direct-to-consumer channel. So obligations as businesses grow, continue to grow along with them. It's a little bit more on top of that. So you can just see with the full scope of the regulatory environment, there's so much to stay on top of where you can quickly see, man, at scale, this is going to be an overburden on our internal resources to do this manually. So what may have worked when the business first launched, when the obligations were minimal, no longer works at scale as the compliance footprint, meaning you're in multiple states, you have multiple sales channels. You really need a good, efficient process and a single source of truth for everything um, to allow that growth to continue unimpeded without regulatory risk and impact to the business. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, this is really the critical bullet that I want to call out. So while customers must provide documentation, meaning they're coming to you and saying, hey, we're going to be a reseller of your product, here's our tax exemption form. The burden is on the seller during an audit to prove why tax was not charged. This seems fairly straightforward. However, like all things sales and use tax, the regulations are on a state level and each state can have their own regulations. Specific to this, when do those exemption certificates need to be renewed? Um, do we even have the correct form number? Everything of that nature. So you can easily see at scale the question of are we doing this correctly can quickly become yes, we're only in one state. We understand the requirements to shoot. Now we're in Florida, California, New York, Texas. Each of those states has their own requirements. So how are we managing that? Typically, with the folks doing it, they're handling multiple jobs. So it's a lot to stay on top of. And here's the critical component here. Missing either you never got the document or it's invalid, meaning it expired or you don't have the right form, often leads to rework. So that credit and rebill scenario, delayed to your month or quarter or year-end close, as well as audit exposure, because you're having to prove to that state auditor why you didn't collect tax on that transaction. This is a little bit more about how we can assist through our best-in-class tax content. In the simplest terms, we know all the rules and we have the backbone and the technology to allow you to run a more efficient process to take you from reactive to proactive. So ideally, you're never out of compliance. We handle these requirements for every industry, every vertical, every size of company. And we do that through, as Wendy's going to show here in a moment, really our best-in-class Business Central solution. This is everything we can do in the D365 Business Central environment. AvaTax, what we've always been known for, those best-in-class 10 millisecond on average tax determinations. We can also handle the AP side of the house now. Cross-border for sales into other countries of physical goods, typically think tariffs, customs and duties regulations, the global indirect tax requirements, e-invoicing and live reporting for those folks selling overseas. And then really what we're going to cover here in a moment, exemption certificate management and how we do that in BC. And then finally, the back end is preparing, filing, and remitting those sales tax returns. All right, Wendy, I'll stop sharing. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Okay, so I'll show you what it looks like. Most of the time, people are going to be inside of Business Central. There's your customer interaction. There's actually your vendor interaction. So it just depends on, are you issuing the certificate to your vendor? We're going to focus right now on when you're getting certificates from your customers. I'll actually back up a tiny bit. Avalara is a partner with Microsoft. We have an integration into Business Central. There's a whole process to come on board. There's also utilities, so bulk activity. We're going to focus on a small portion of that, what we call a connector, that middleware that's embedded in your Business Central environment. So I'm under the customer card. A couple things I want to focus on. One is the tax area code. It's just going to always say AvaTax. AvaTax when we're making tax decisions, whether it's $0 because you're not registered there, a $0 tax dollar decision because you've got an exemption certificate for that customer, or whether you're not even selling something, it's always going to say tax liable and tax area code. Even my exempt customers will say tax liable. Okay. Other than that, you're going to do everything as you normally would do, minus having to pick tax schedules and understand if you've seen an address and all of those different pieces. Where AvaTax is going to tie in on the customer piece of it is under related and the Avalara functions. So there's three main things that people are doing with their exemption certificates from the customer perspective in your ERP. And we'll emphasize when we put this integration in place, it ties into Avalara's portal. And then you'll see we've got a full exemption module. There's even more that you can, now I've logged out. There's even more that you can do inside of the portal, but you can also do the core things because the key is the people that are invoicing and getting certificates, they're not sales tax experts and they're not exemption experts. So we've added those pieces into Business Central so that your folks can do that. So first and foremost, just adding a customer or updating a customer. So we can update with whatever the information is. Yep, that means we know from an exemption perspective, nobody had to do double entry, nobody had to know anything, just customer indicated they're exempt, you can add them, or if they've updated, they've moved, you can update them. So that's a very easy piece that nobody has to understand the details, they can just send that. We've also got the ability, when customer has a question, we can look at certificates, and we're going to in a second. Actually, but let's look at it. So you can see any certificates that are on file. Anything in this exemption module that we've got on file, Business Central has a view to it. Again, we're not going to update customers by saying they're not tax liable. They're all tax liable. It's just you can see what certificates are on file. We can see for Florida, we've got expired certificates. So we have their 2024, their 2025, but we don't have a 2026. For California, we do have one, and 9999 is the way Avalara expresses a non-expiring certificate. So this California certificate is still valid, ongoing. The Florida, we would otherwise charge tax. They haven't renewed their Florida exemption. So you can see those pieces. You can also see there's a certificate ID. And if you'd like to, you can pull up and see those in either JPEG or PDF. So this really is that window into the Avalara exemption module. So you see those pieces here, but nobody has to know because as we do our transactions, it's using the existing exemption certificates. So again, this is a customer perspective, right? So that your folks can answer questions when customers call in. Hi, ring, ring, customer support or whomever answers and says, customer is frustrated. You charged me tax, I'm exempt. So this allows you to come in and view without access to Avalara and say, yes, well, you usually get things shipped to Texas, but you only have a California certificate on file. Did you want to send us the Texas one? And that's where there's an integration directly in here. And it can literally kick off communication to my customer and it sends them a request. And folks don't have to know any of the details. We just know we sent them an email and it gave them all the instructions on how to supply the exemption certificate. If I go to my email, I'll have received that. And there's rules. They can either go online, they can email it, they can mail it, or they can go online and submit that exemption certificate, either uploading it or creating one. So all of that is included. People, the key is that, again, very few sales tax experts in this world, even fewer exemption certificate experts. To Larry's point, different states have different rules with different forms and the different requirements within those forms. So all of the tools that your folks can have access from your Business Central environment will help those pieces. One last thing I want to point out, if I haven't fallen asleep, those expirations. You can also automate any communication and follow up on those. So this is the back end of their Avalara portal. You can choose to follow up on expirations or not, how proactive you want to be, how many reminders do you want to have going to your customer. So all of that can happen behind the scenes without your involvement in it. All right. Handing it back to you, Larry.
Thanks, Wendy. All right, to wrap up here, we're going to talk big picture. So, what's the benefit of using a system like Avalara's exemption certificate management platform within Business Central? So, exemption management is one key function of overall sales and use tax compliance. But by leveraging our platform through our Business Central integration, we're establishing a single source of truth for all things indirect tax compliance. So what does that mean? It means we're going to eliminate recalculation and duplicate transactions if compliance is being done across multiple systems. So that single source of truth for all rules, all rates, all exemptions is critical. It allows us to track liabilities across all systems and applying the necessary compliance regulations to in invoice. We're able to track economic nexus in virtually real time. So the way our solution works in terms of being scalable and flexible, a customer tells us where they need Avalara, and then we'll track their requirements in every other state and let them know, hey, we're nearing the requirement to register and potentially add a new state to your portfolio. And then finally, all of that front end work through our BC integration means we're able to enable the back end automation for filing and remittance. So it truly is an end-to-end piece of which exemption management is a critical component. But that's how it all works together. And this diagram is kind of a quick overview of what kind of generic infrastructure would look like and where Avalara would fit into that. All right. So that is everything with exemption management. As quickly as we could touch on the high points, we could go down a rabbit hole for an hour or more. But that's the gist of what we do, why we do it, and what it looks like.
Thank you so much. That was great. Of course, you have to manage those exemption certificates, and if you can automate it, the better. Better to do it automated. Then you have to think about it.